Hi, I'm Evelyn,
And I'm Robert.
I'm Amy.
I'm Evie.
and we're talking about it.
Yay.
And if you didn't notice, we have two new voices with us because we're starting The Hobbit. Woo!
Yay!
So much enthusiasm, right? Apparently. But we're really excited to do The Hobbit. And as you heard, we have two voices that are going to be joining us for the Hobbit portion of this podcast. So I want to introduce you guys. Evie, why don't you go first?
My name's Evie. I sometimes go by Evelyn Mykelrose. I have very little experience with Tolkien. I've seen the Lord of the Rings movies, but I haven't seen the Hobbit movies, despite the fact that I think I stole it from the Lewises for like 4 years. Never
You did
watched
borrow it and never watch it.
Yeah, it just kind of got
It's
lost.
okay.
I gave it back. But yeah,
Yes.
this is my first time reading The Hobbit, so I have very little experience with it.
Yeah, the Hobbit movies could have been halved if they didn't add the romance that doesn't exist in the books.
Yeah, we'll
I
get to the
fully
movies when we
agree.
get to the movies. We will get there. All right, and Amy?
So I technically have listened to The Hobbit all the way through, but it was on a road trip. So I technically have listened to it, but I don't really remember it at all. I have seen the books. I'm a pretty big Lord of the Rings fan and own two of the three extended edition movies. And I was on the Return of the King episode, which is my favorite Lord of the Rings movie. But I have a long history of loving Tolkien and loving the movies that have come after it. Although I will say I'm not a huge fan of the Hobbit movies in comparison. But I'm really excited to be here, excited to read the book with actually paying attention. And I can honestly say I don't think I remember anything from them. And it's probably been over 10 years since I've watched the movies. So I feel fresh.
Right, and that's why we invited you guys on, because this is the only work of Tolkien that I've actually read before. So I actually know what I'm going to be talking about. Weird.
That's
Because I
exciting.
love The Hobbit so much, but Lord of the Rings, it wasn't until this I mean, that was the whole point of the Lord of the Rings chapters. I had never read it before. But this one is very different. Um, so just a little background information on The Hobbit with this intro episode, just for kind of a little bit of background. So prior to writing The Hobbit, Tolkien himself was an academic professor of languages and had only published a few poems. He did write as a hobby for his children and his friends, and he started creating the now famous Elven language and the corresponding mythology since about 1917. We go much more into Tolkien's writing process in earlier episodes, so I'm only talking about The Hobbit right now. So Tolkien told a friend in a letter that at some point in the 1930s, he was grading papers when he found a blank page and he simply wrote the words, which is the now famous opening to The Hobbit: "In a hole in the ground, there lived a hobbit." And around the same time, Tolkien was telling like whimsical stories for his kids with these random characters to tell them bedtime stories. And his son Christopher Tolkien, who later continued the works of his father and get them and did a lot of editing and publishing. A lot of his stuff that was left unpublished at the time of his death. He admits that at one point he interrupted his father's story because the color of like the door was wrong. He's like, "You said it was green yesterday, but you said it was blue today." And so his father said something of the lines of like, "Damn you, kid." He actually started like writing it down that way it would stay consistent for the kids. And then as they got older, he actually hired them as the proofreaders for The Hobbit. Christopher saying that he earned 2 pennies for each mistake he found. Which, I mean, back then's a lot, actually.
Yeah.
And so once he finished the initial draft, which you have some interesting information on in a second, he lent it to C.S. Lewis first, as well as a student of his. And then somehow it ended up in the hands of a publisher who asked his 10-year-old son to read and review it. The boy loved it just a lot. He said it was like one of the greatest things he's ever read. And they immediately agreed to publish it. And it went on to be just one of the most successful children's books of the 20th century. And that is something I do want to note is The Hobbit is more of a children's story, while Lord of the Rings is more for the adults who grew up. And then you had a couple fun little tidbits in there as well about the drafts and such.
Right. So one of the first people outside of the family that Tolkien lent the manuscript to, and this was the 1932 manuscript.
Because the original manuscript and draft is completely lost to time at this point.
Right. And that's because C.S. Lewis lost it when he borrowed it.
He lost it multiple times.
Yes.
Like another historian said that we shouldn't be looking at how his manuscript was lost, but instead how any copy managed to survive.
Tolkien has said it was set in a time between the time of fairy and the dominance of men.
Yeah.
It's one way he described it as well. The Hobbit has been published in 41 languages.
Mm-hmm.
And people who have read it, no matter what language, know that first line.
Mm-hmm.
They hear that line, they know exactly what it is.
Yep. That famous first line, yeah. The only other translation note I wanted to make is when it was being translated, it got translated to several languages pretty early on, but Tolkien did not allow it. He allowed it to be translated into German, but it was not allowed to be published in Germany during World War II because he didn't think that, he said something along the lines of the Nazis don't deserve it.
It's fair.
Yeah. Well, they were going to burn it anyway. So.
I did have a question because in my book it says that it was like updated in like the 50s or something to match Lord of the Rings. Is like all modern copies the new updated version, or is the book I'm reading like the original one? Like, how would I know that?
That's a great question because that was something that I didn't write down, but I wanted to mention and totally forgot. So yeah, Tolkien continuously updated The Hobbit up until his death. And even a couple other parts, Christopher found notes that he wanted to do to update it to make it more consistent because he immediately found errors upon first publishing. And while the most books that you're going to find of The Hobbit in like the bookstores is going to be the most updated version. However, you can find older versions and transcripts of other versions if you want to read them. And something we're going to be talking about after we read it is you are reading a history of The Hobbit, which is basically the history of The Hobbit being written and its later transformation and corrections, which is pretty cool. So yeah, the copy that I have, I know is the most updated version and probably for you guys too. So that's just how we're going to go off of it.
I guess I should mention this here. I'm listening to the book. Okay. I lost my ability to sit and read a long time ago. So I'm listening to it on the audiobook. It's being read to me by Andy Serkis, who voices Gollum. And it's beautifully done. So I don't know what version I'm listening to.
Oh, that is incredible.
So which version of the recording are you listening to where it's just the one person that reads the whole thing, or is it a cast?
It's just Andy Serkis reading the whole thing, but he does the voices and everything.
I haven't listened to it because I've been trying to be good and actually read the book, but I saw he was doing a version of, and I was like, oh, I have to do that.
It's really good. I will say his voice acting is incredible, and he sings all of the songs, which I tried to read The Hobbit a long time ago, and I immediately stopped because of how many songs there were. So he actually sings the songs, and I find that much more enjoyable for me.
That's fair.
I have to say, when I was in high school, I never read the songs either.
Really?
My rule of hand, pretty much reading anything in high school, if it wasn't in italics, I didn't read it. So
I love that.
But you miss so much by not doing that.
Well, that's why I like the song so much now.
It's like
All
you
right.
learn
Well,
something new the next time.
yeah. So unless there's any other information we want to throw out there, that's just our really quick intro episode on who our hosts are for coming up, as well as just a little bit of background with The Hobbit.
Yes.
All right. So both these episodes are going to come out on the same day. So can't wait to see you guys for Hobbit chapter 1 and 2.
Woohoo.
Yay,
All right.
can't wait.
We've been talking about it. Bye.
Bye.